The email from my bank arrived at 3:42 a.m. while I was halfway across the Pacific Ocean. Confirmation of mortgage refinancing application. My wife Rachel wasn't authorized to refinance our home. At least, that's what I thought until that moment. I'd spent 12 years building a life in that Victorian house on Maple Street, the house my grandfather left me, the only real piece of family history I had left. And now, 35,000 feet above the ocean, I stared at my phone screen as the reality sank in. Rachel was trying to transfer our family home solely into her name while I was on a business trip to Tokyo. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Daniel Mitchell, 41 years old, Regional Sales Director for Nexus Pharmaceuticals. I'd been with the company for 15 years, building our Asia-Pacific division from nothing. The frequent travel was the price of success. 2 weeks in Japan, a week in Singapore, 10 days in South Korea. Rachel had always said she understood. "Your ambition is why I fell in love with you," she'd told me on our 5th anniversary. That was before things changed. The bank email was only the beginning. I spent the remaining 9 hours of my flight combing through our shared accounts from the airplane Wi-Fi. There it was, a trail of digital breadcrumbs. 3 weeks ago, Rachel had contacted Morris Residential Law. 2 days later, a $2,500 payment to them from our joint account. Then applications to the county recorder's office, document preparation fees, a home appraisal. I'd been raised to handle crisis with calm. My father, a former Navy officer, had drilled it into me. Panic clouds judgment. Information clarifies it. So instead of frantically calling Rachel, I methodically documented everything I found. The Tokyo meetings could wait. This couldn't. When I landed at Narita International Airport, I made 2 calls. The first was to my childhood friend, Alex Freeman, now a real estate attorney in our hometown of Portland. The second was to our family banker, Thomas Wu, who had helped my grandfather manage his assets for decades before handling mine. "She can't just transfer the deed without your signature," Alex told me, his voice steady despite the concern I could hear beneath it. Unless what? I pressed, finding a quiet corner of the airport lounge. "Unless she has power of attorney or some other legal document giving her authority to act on your behalf." The second call was more illuminating. "Mr. Mitchell, there was a document filed with us 3 months ago," Thomas explained. "A power of attorney form. It has your signature on it." My blood went cold. I never signed any power of attorney. The silence on the line spoke volumes. "The signature matched what we have on file," Thomas finally said. "It was notarized." I cancelled the rest of my business trip. 12 hours later, I was on a flight back to Portland, my mind racing with questions. Rachel and I had been married for 9 years. We'd had rough patches, what couple doesn't, but nothing that explained this. The house on Maple Street wasn't just real estate. It was where my grandfather had raised me after my parents died, where he'd taught me to repair the antique banister, to appreciate the crown molding he'd installed by hand, to respect the history embedded in its walls. As the plane descended toward PDX, I thought about the last year. Rachel's increased interest in our finances, her suggestion that we update our wills, the repeated comments about how the house was too big for just 2 people and worth a fortune in today's market. I dismissed it as practical thinking. Now, I wasn't so sure. What Rachel didn't know, what nobody knew except for my grandfather's old attorney, was that I had filed a trust document of my own 5 years ago. A family preservation trust that my grandfather had prepared before his death with specific provisions about the house. A safeguard I'd never imagined I'd need to use. I took an Uber from the airport, telling the driver to take me to Alex's office downtown rather than home. I needed to understand exactly what I was facing before confronting Rachel. The city slid. By outside the window, Familiar landmarks that usually brought comfort, now just backdrops to my racing thoughts. Alex was waiting for me, his office lights still on despite the late hour. On his desk were printouts of everything I'd forwarded him from my phone. "This is methodical, Dan," he said, tapping the papers. "The timing of these legal consultations, the specific type of refinancing application, she's not just acting on impulse." "What's the play here?" I asked. "What's the end game?" Alex leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in the quiet office. "Based on these documents, it looks like she's establishing sole ownership. The refinancing would replace your existing mortgage with one solely in her name, using the power of attorney to authorize it. Once that's done, she could sell the property without your consent. Can she do that? Legally. Not if the power of attorney is fraudulent." Alex adjusted his glasses, but proving that might be complicated. "These things often come down to, he said, she said, without additional evidence." "What about the trust?" I asked. Alex smiled slightly. "That's our ace. If your grandfather's trust was properly established and recorded, it supersedes nearly everything else. The house can't be transferred out of the family under any circumstances." I hadn't told Rachel about the trust when we got married, not out of secrecy, but because it had seemed irrelevant to our daily lives. The trust had specific provisions. The property would always remain with blood relatives of the Mitchell family. It could never be sold, only passed down. My grandfather had been explicit about this after watching neighbors lose generational homes during the last housing crisis. "So what's our next move?" I asked. "Document everything. Don't confront her yet. We need to see how far this goes," Alex advised. "I'll pull the complete trust documents and we'll file emergency injunctions to block any property transfers." I checked into a downtown hotel rather than going home. It felt strange sleeping just 3 miles from my own bed, but I needed space to think. I needed to understand why the woman I'd shared my life with for nearly a decade would do this. Morning came with new information. Alex had been busy, leveraging his connections at the county clerk's office. The power of attorney document had been notarized by someone named Patricia Dawson. A quick search revealed she worked at the law office Rachel had consulted Morris Residential Law. "It's a clear conflict of interest," Alex said over breakfast at the hotel restaurant. "A notary at the law firm she hired notarized a document that supposedly had your signature. We can use that." I pushed my untouched eggs around the plate. "But why? We're not hurting for money. Rachel's interior design business is doing well. I make good money." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The house is almost paid off." Alex hesitated. "Have you checked her personal accounts, not just the joint ones?" I hadn't. Rachel and I maintained personal accounts alongside our joint accounts, a vestige of our independent lives before marriage that had just continued. We deposited our paychecks into personal accounts, then transferred agreed-upon amounts to joint accounts for household expenses. It had always worked for us. "I'll need to get access," I said. "Her passwords are different from our shared ones." Alex nodded slowly. "There's another angle here too. The timing of all this, while you're on an international trip, suggests she thought you wouldn't notice until it was done. Was this trip planned far in advance?" "Months ago," I confirmed. "It's an annual meeting. I go every year." "So she knew exactly when you'd be gone, and for how long?" Alex's expression was grim. "Dan, I hate to ask this, but is there any chance Rachel has connected with someone else?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd never considered the possibility of infidelity. We had our issues, my travel schedule, her occasional remoteness, but betrayal of that magnitude had never crossed my mind. "I don't know," I admitted, and the words tasted bitter. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator, a referral from Alex, a former police detective named Marcus Sullivan who specialized in financial investigations. His office was sparse but organized, much like the man himself. "I don't need to follow your wife around," Marcus said after I explained the situation. "What you're describing is financial infidelity. It leaves a clearer trail than most affairs." He requested access to all the information I had, plus authorization to dig deeper. "People think they're clever," he said, "but money always tells a story." 3 days passed. I extended my hotel stay, telling the office I was still in Tokyo handling the fallout from the abruptly terminated meetings. I avoided Rachel's calls, responding only with brief texts about delayed flights and bad connections. Each lie felt like another crack in the foundation of our marriage, but I needed time. On the 4th day, Marcus called with news. "We need to meet," he said, his tone giving nothing away. His office was the same, but the folders on his desk were new, thick with papers, labeled with dates going back 18 months. "Your wife opened a separate bank account 1.5 years ago." Marcus began without preamble. "She's been funneling money from her design business into it, rather than her regular personal account, about 60% of her income." He slid a statement across the desk. The balance made my stomach clench. $187,000. "That's not all," Marcus continued. 3 months ago, she consulted with a divorce attorney, not the real estate law firm, a different one specializing in high-asset divorces. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "We don't have high assets," I said automatically. "Just the house. Our retirement accounts, her business." "The house on Maple Street was recently appraised at $2 million, Marcus said. "In this market, with its historical features and location, it could sell for more. Your combined retirement accounts total approximately $700,000. Add her business, valuation of roughly $300,000, and you're looking at assets over $2 million. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. "So this is about divorce, taking the house before filing?" Marcus nodded. "It's unfortunately common. Move assets before filing to establish status quo possession. Courts often maintain the status quo during proceedings." He pushed another folder forward. "There's something else. Your wife has been in regular contact with someone named Jason Blackwood. Multiple calls, text messages, emails." "That name doesn't mean anything to me," I said. "He's a residential property developer, specializes in converting historic homes into luxury apartments." Marcus pulled out a printed email. "This is from 3 weeks ago. She sent him interior photos of your house, floor plans, and discussed conversion potential once the transfer is complete." Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about taking the house in a divorce. This was about selling it to a developer who would tear out its heart. The handcrafted details, the history, everything my grandfather had preserved. "How do we stop this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Marcus deferred to Alex, who had joined us midway through the meeting. "We've already filed emergency injunctions based on the questionable power of attorney," Alex said. "But now we activate the trust." The Mitchell Family Preservation Trust had been my grandfather's final gift to me, established through his estate. Planning, it placed the house under strict protection. No sale, no transfer out of the family bloodline, no exceptions. "Rachel may not know about the trust," Alex continued, "but it's a legally recorded document. It trumps anything she's trying to do." "When do we confront her?" I asked. "Now," Alex said simply. "We have enough." I decided against a dramatic confrontation. No storming into the house, no public scene. Instead, I texted Rachel that I was back from Tokyo and suggested meeting at Riverfront Park, neutral ground, a place we'd spent many Sunday afternoons early in our relationship. She agreed immediately, her response enthusiastic, normal, as if she wasn't in the middle of stealing our home. The park was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon. I arrived early, choosing a bench overlooking the Willamette River. The water moved steadily, past, unconcerned with human problems. I found that oddly comforting. Rachel arrived looking exactly as she always did. Blonde hair in a neat ponytail, designer jeans, casual elegance that had first attracted me to her at a friend's gallery, opening 10 years ago. She smiled when she saw me, genuine happiness in her expression. For a moment I doubted everything I'd learned. "You're back early," she said, moving to hug me. I accepted the embrace, but didn't return it with my usual warmth. She noticed immediately, stepping back with a slight frown. "What's wrong? Did something happen in Tokyo?" "I never made it past the airport in Tokyo," I said evenly. "I came back when I got a notification about the mortgage refinancing application." Her expression flickered, surprise, then quick calculation, then concerned confusion. It was masterful. If I hadn't seen the evidence, I might have believed it. "Oh, that," she said with a dismissive wave. "It was just exploratory. With rates so low, I thought we might save some money. I was going to discuss it with you when you got back." Using a forged power of attorney, consulting with Morris. Residential about transferring the deed solely to your name? The calculated confusion disappeared, replaced by something harder, more genuine. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been protecting myself," I corrected. "Just like you've been protecting yourself by squirreling away money for 18 months. Just like you've been planning with Jason Blackwood to convert my grandfather's home into apartments." She stepped back, as if I'd raised a hand to her, though I remained seated, outwardly calm despite the storm inside me. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter," I interrupted. "What matters is that it stops now, all of it." For a moment, Rachel seemed to struggle with which approach to take. Then her shoulders straightened, and the pretense fell away. "That house is half mine," she said, her voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. 9 years of marriage. 9 years of waiting for you to come home from business trips. 9 years of living in a museum to your grandfather that I can't even redecorate properly. "So divorce me," I said simply. "Take half of everything else. But the house isn't negotiable." "It's worth over $1 million, she countered. "I'm entitled to my share." "The house isn't mine to give," I said, and pulled out the trust document from my briefcase. "It's in a family preservation trust. Has been for 5 years. It can't be sold, can't be transferred out of the Mitchell family, ever." She snatched the document, scanning it with increasing dismay. "This can't be legal. You can't just put marital assets in a trust." "It wasn't a marital asset when the trust was created." Alex had explained this to me in detail. "My grandfather established the trust. I'm the beneficiary and trustee. The house was never jointly owned. It remained in my name only. Check the deed." Rachel had never questioned why her name wasn't on the deed. I realize now that might have been deliberate, biding her time, planning. "You've been lying to me for our entire marriage," she accused, voice shaking with authentic anger now. "I never lied. I just never mentioned a trust that seemed irrelevant to our daily lives." I met her gaze steadily. "Unlike forging my signature, or plotting to sell my family home while I was overseas." She crumpled the trust document, letting it fall to the ground between us. "Jason's offer is $1.4 million, she said, a last attempt. "We could split that, start fresh." "There will be no offer," I said with finality. "The trust has already filed injunctions against any transfer or sale. The power of attorney has been flagged as fraudulent. Your scheme is over, Rachel." For a moment, something like genuine regret crossed her face. "We could have been happy, you know, if you'd been home more, if you'd put me first for once, instead of your career or this obsession with your grandfather's legacy. Maybe, I acknowledged, but we'll never know now. I stood, picking up the crumpled trust document. I've moved your things to a storage unit. The access code has been texted to you. I've also transferred half of our liquid assets to your personal account, the one I knew about. It's more than fair. You can't just... I already have, I said quietly. Divorce papers will be delivered tomorrow. Standard terms, equitable division of all assets except the house. My lawyer will contact yours. I walked away then, her angry words fading behind me. The park stretched before me, autumn leaves scattering across the path. Each step felt both heavy and liberating. That night, I returned to the house on Maple Street for the first time since discovering Rachel's betrayal. The familiar creak of the porch steps, the solid feel of the century-old doorknob in my hand, small comforts in the midst of personal upheaval. Inside, the house felt different without Rachel's presence, emptier in some ways, but also more authentically itself. I ran my hand along the banister my grandfather had taught me to restore, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingertips. In the study, I opened the hidden compartment behind the bookshelf, another of my grandfather's clever additions, and returned the trust document to its proper place. Beside it lay a letter he'd written me before his death, sealed until I needed guidance. I'd never opened it before, never needed to. Now seemed like the right time. The envelope was cream-colored, heavyweight stationery. My name written in my grandfather's precise hand. Inside was a single page. Daniel, it began, if you're reading this, you've encountered a situation that's made you question what matters most. Remember that houses can be rebuilt, fortunes remade, but integrity once compromised is the hardest thing to restore. Whatever you're facing, face it standing on the foundation of who you've always been, not what you own or what you've lost. The house is just wood and stone. The home is what you carry inside you. I read it twice, then carefully returned it to the envelope. My grandfather, somehow reaching across time to provide exactly the perspective I needed. The divorce proceedings were straightforward, if not amicable. Rachel contested the trust initially, but her lawyers eventually advised her that the battle would be costly and likely unsuccessful. She accepted the settlement, half of everything except the house, and moved to Seattle, where Jason Blackwood was developing a new project. I sometimes thought about what might have happened if I hadn't discovered her plan in time. If the bank notification had gone to our joint email instead of my personal one, if my grandfather hadn't had the foresight to create the trust. Small moments of chance that altered the course of everything. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Marcus Sullivan called me with an unexpected update. "Thought you might want to know," he said without preamble. "Rachel's new venture with Blackwood just filed for bankruptcy. Investors pulled out after construction issues were discovered. She lost everything she put in." I thanked him for the information, but took no satisfaction in it. We make our choices, then live with the consequences. Rachel had chosen deception. I had chosen to protect what mattered. The house on Maple Street remains in the Mitchell family, its history intact. I've started restoring the third-floor rooms that had been neglected for years, using the skills my grandfather taught me. On weekends, my nephew comes over to learn these same skills: the proper way to sand hardwood, how to match historical paint colors, the patience required to restore rather than replace. Sometimes in the evenings, I sit on the porch swing and think about trust. Both the legal document that saved my family home and the more fragile humankind that can be broken in an instant. My grandfather used to say that a house becomes a home when it holds more memories than materials. Despite everything that happened, this place still feels like home. In the end, what Rachel never understood was that the house wasn't about money or property values. It was about continuity, about honoring promises, about the tangible connection to those who came before us. Some things aren't meant to be sold, or transferred or converted into something new. Some things are meant to be preserved, protected, passed down intact. The trust document she never knew I filed wasn't just papers and legal jargon. It was a promise across generations. And unlike the promises Rachel and I made to each other, this one remains unbroken. The weeks following my confrontation with Rachel at Riverfront Park were a strange blur of legal meetings and emotional reckonings. I moved through them with a hollow feeling in my chest, going through necessary motions while trying to make sense of how someone I'd shared my life with for nearly a decade could have methodically plotted to take everything that mattered to me. The divorce papers were delivered to Rachel's new apartment, a sleek downtown high-rise that couldn't have been more different from our Victorian on Maple Street. Alex had prepared everything meticulously, the terms reasonable but firm. Half of our liquid assets, retirement accounts split down the middle, her business remaining entirely hers. The house and everything connected to it remained with me, protected by the trust. She's hired Winston Chambers, Alex told me during our weekly update at his office. The name meant nothing to me. High-powered divorce attorney, known for aggressive tactics. Does that change our approach? I asked, watching rain streak down the windows of his office. Portland winters had always been melancholy, but this one felt particularly fitting. No, the trust is solid, but it suggests she's still fighting, at least in her mind. Alex closed his laptop. Prepare yourself for some ugliness, Dan. When people can't get what they want legally, they sometimes try other avenues. The warning proved prophetic. 3 days later, I received an email from a name I didn't recognize, Lisa Donovan. The subject line read simply, "Thought you should see this." Inside was a series of screenshots of text messages between Rachel and Jason Blackwood, dating back over a year. Their relationship was clearly more than professional. Much more. I stared at intimate exchanges, planning not just the acquisition of my house, but weekend getaways together while I was overseas on business, plans for their future, mockery of my attachment to my grandfather's legacy. I felt physically ill reading them, but forced myself to continue until the final message sent the day before our confrontation at the park. Once this goes through, we'll have everything. Just stick to the plan. I forwarded everything to Alex without comment, then shut down my computer and took a long walk through the neighborhood despite the rain. The water soaked through my jacket, but I barely noticed. The betrayal shouldn't have cut deeper. I'd already discovered Rachel's plot to take the house, but somehow seeing the calculated nature of it all, laid out in their private messages, made it more real. Lisa Donovan, I learned later, was Jason's former assistant, who'd been abruptly fired when he began his relationship with Rachel. Her revenge was simple but effective, shining light on their deception. When I returned home, drenched and cold, I found a voice message from Rachel. "That bitch Lisa sent you those messages, didn't she?" Her voice was tight with anger. "It's not what you think, Daniel. Jason is a business associate who became a friend when I was lonely. You were gone more than you were home. What did you expect?" I deleted the message without responding. There was nothing left to say. The next day, Rachel's attorney filed a formal challenge to the trust, claiming it was established in bad faith to shield marital assets. Alex had anticipated this move. "It won't work," he assured me. "The trust predates any issues in your marriage. Your grandfather established it, not you. Courts are very reluctant to pierce family trusts without evidence of fraud, which doesn't exist here." Still, the legal battle dragged on, motions and counter-motions, depositions where I had to sit across from Rachel and answer questions designed to paint me as deceptive for not explicitly discussing the trust during our marriage. Her attorney tried to establish a pattern of financial secrecy on my part, an Ironic strategy, given what we'd uncovered about her hidden accounts. Did you intentionally withhold information about the Mitchell Family Preservation Trust from your wife? Winston Chambers asked during my deposition, his voice sharp and accusatory. No, I replied honestly. It simply never came up. The trust didn't affect our daily finances or decision-making. Yet you were aware that the primary marital asset, your home, was protected in a way that would prevent your wife from ever having an ownership interest? The house was never a marital asset, I corrected. It remained separately owned property throughout the marriage, which Rachel was aware of as her name was never on the deed. Chambers leaned forward. Did you ever explicitly tell Rachel that the house could never be sold? I met his gaze steadily. My grandfather made clear to both of us when we moved in that the house was meant to stay in the family. That wasn't a secret. That's not what I asked, Mr. Mitchell. I never had reason to discuss specific terms of the trust because selling the house was never part of our plans until Rachel decided to transfer it to herself without my knowledge. The questioning continued for hours, a verbal chess match where every answer could potentially be twisted. Alex had prepared me well, though. Stay truthful, don't speculate, don't let anger guide your responses. Meanwhile, life continued in strange new patterns. I threw myself into work, making up for the Japanese business connections damaged by my abrupt departure. I hired a contractor to repair the roof, something Rachel and I had discussed for years, but never prioritized. I had dinner once a week with my sister Jenny, who'd been horrified to learn what Rachel had attempted. I never trusted her, Jenny admitted over pasta at our favorite Italian restaurant. Something always seemed calculated about her interest in you. You never said anything, I pointed out, not accusingly, just stating fact. Jenny shrugged. Would you have listened? You were in love. We all see what we want to see. She was right, of course. Looking back, there had been signs, Rachel's increasing questions about my grandfather's estate, her subtle criticisms of the house's historical features that limited modernization, her suggestions that we could trade up to something more contemporary. I'd interpreted it all as normal couple disagreements about style and priorities. I'd never imagined a methodical plan to take everything. 4 months into the divorce proceedings, Rachel's strategy shifted. If she couldn't win legally, she'd try another approach. I received an email with a simple subject line, "We should talk." Against Alex's advice, I agreed to meet her, not at our park this time, but at a neutral coffee shop downtown. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. When Rachel walked in, I was struck by how familiar and foreign she seemed simultaneously. Same blonde ponytail, same confident walk. But her expression was different, calculating, in a way I'd never noticed before my discovery, or perhaps had chosen not to see. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. She looked tired, the confident facade showing cracks. "This legal battle is draining both of us, financially and otherwise." "That was your choice," I reminded her. "You filed the challenge to the trust." She nodded, conceding the point. "I'd like to propose a compromise." "I'm listening." I kept my tone neutral, giving nothing away. "I'll drop all challenges to the trust, except the division of assets as outlined in your original proposal." She paused, meeting my eyes directly. "In exchange, I want a one-time payment of $500,000. The figure hung in the air between us. Not coincidentally, it was roughly what her share of the house would have been if it had been considered marital property. "That's not going to happen, Rachel. Think about it, Daniel. A clean break. No more depositions. No more legal fees. No more dragging this out for months or even years." She leaned forward. "We both made mistakes. Let's end this. The only mistake I made was not seeing who you really were sooner," I said quietly. There will be no payment. The settlement terms are fair as they stand. Her expression hardened. Then I'll keep fighting. I'll contest everything. I'll make this as painful and expensive as possible. That's your right, I acknowledged, but the outcome won't change. She stood abruptly. You know what your problem is, Daniel? You think holding on to that house somehow keeps your grandfather alive. It's just wood and stone. You're choosing it over moving forward, over peace. The words struck closer to home than I wanted to admit, echoing elements of my grandfather's letter. But there was a fundamental difference. He had emphasized not being defined by possessions, not surrendering them to deception. This isn't about the house anymore, Rachel. It's about honesty. It's about trust. You shattered both. She left without another word, the bell above the coffee shop door chiming softly as she disappeared into the rainy afternoon. That evening, I sat in my grandfather's study, my study now, and really looked at the room that had been his sanctuary. The built-in bookshelves he'd crafted by hand, the window seat where he'd read me stories as a child, the desk where he'd taught me to manage finances, where he'd shown me the difference between price and value. On impulse, I opened the hidden compartment again and took out his letter, reading it a second time with new eyes. The house is just wood and stone. The home is what you carry inside you. Was Rachel right? Was I clinging to the physical structure at the expense of moving forward? I considered the question honestly, without defensiveness. No, this wasn't about stubbornness or inability to let go. This was about refusing to reward deception, about honoring commitments across generations. My grandfather hadn't preserved this house for it to be taken through fraud and manipulation. The next morning, I called Alex with a decision. I want to counteroffer, I told him. I'll add $100,000 to the settlement if Rachel drops all challenges immediately and signs a non-disclosure agreement about the entire situation. That's generous considering her actions, Alex observed. It's not about generosity. It's about ending this chapter and starting the next one. Alex made the offer through proper channels. Rachel's response came within hours. A flat rejection, coupled with a new demand for $750,000. She's playing hardball, Alex sighed when he called me with the news, but her position is weakening. The judge assigned to your case has a history of upholding family trusts. The forensic evidence of the forged power of attorney is compelling. She's running out of options. 2 days later, I received another unexpected message. Not from Rachel this time, but from Jason Blackwood. A request to meet, man to man. Against my better judgment and definitely against Alex's advice. I agreed. We met at an upscale bar in the Pearl District. Blackwood was exactly as I'd imagined from his online presence, expensively dressed, artificially tanned, with the overly firm handshake of someone perpetually closing deals. Appreciate you meeting me, he said, signaling the bartender for drinks. I think there's been some misunderstanding about my role in all this. I've seen the text messages, Jason, I said, declining the offered whiskey. There's no misunderstanding. He had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable before regrouping. Business and personal sometimes get complicated. Rachel and I connected. Over a shared vision for property development, things progressed from there. If this meeting is an attempt to convince me to settle with Rachel, you're wasting both our time. Blackwood leaned back, studying me with newfound interest. You're not what I expected, he admitted. Rachel described you as obsessed with the past, unwilling to consider the potential of that property. But that's not it, is it? This is about principle for you. It's about honesty. It's about respecting history and family commitments, concepts. I don't expect you to understand. He smiled thinly. I understand value, Mitchell. That house sitting on a single-family lot is worth $1, $2 million. Converted to luxury condos, the property value triples. It's not for sale, not now, not ever. I stood, dropping enough cash on the bar to cover his drink. Tell Rachel her latest messenger failed too. I walked out feeling strangely lighter. The encounter had crystallized something for me. This wasn't just a battle over assets or property. It was a clash of values, of worldviews. Rachel and Blackwood saw only financial potential where I saw irreplaceable heritage. They calculated, worth in dollars where I measured it in continuity and integrity. 3 days after my meeting with Blackwood, the legal landscape shifted dramatically. Marcus Sullivan, the private investigator I'd retained, uncovered evidence that the notary who had certified the fraudulent power of attorney, Patricia Dawson from Morris Residential Law, had falsified credentials. She wasn't a properly commissioned notary at all. "This changes everything," Alex said when we met to discuss the findings. "It moves this from a civil dispute into potential criminal territory, forgery, fraud, practicing law without proper credentials. The firm will want to distance themselves immediately to avoid liability." He was right. Within 24 hours of Alex presenting this evidence to opposing counsel, Rachel's legal team requested a settlement conference. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at the courthouse. Rachel sat across the table, flanked by Winston Chambers and a junior associate. She avoided eye contact, staring instead at her folded hands on the polished wood surface. "My client is prepared to withdraw all challenges to the Mitchell Family Preservation Trust," Chambers began, his tone professional but subdued. "She will accept the original settlement terms regarding division of assets." Alex nodded, unsurprised. "And the non-disclosure agreement?" "Acceptable, with modifications to allow necessary disclosures to financial institutions and future spouses." "And our client's offer of the additional $100,000? Alex inquired. Chambers glanced at Rachel, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "That would be acceptable as well." The rest of the meeting was technical and procedural. Timelines for filing dismissals, payment schedules, specific language for the non-disclosure agreement. Throughout it all, Rachel remained silent, a shadow of the confident woman who had once threatened to fight to the bitter end. As we prepared to leave, she finally spoke, addressing me directly for the first time. "I want you to know that it wasn't all a lie," she said quietly. "Not the beginning. I considered several responses, but ultimately settled on the simplest truth. It doesn't matter anymore, Rachel. We can't go back and sort real from false. All we can do is move forward separately." She nodded once, accepting this, and we parted ways for what I hoped would be the last time. The final divorce papers were signed 2 weeks later. No ceremony, no closure beyond the legal kind. Just signatures on documents that dissolved 9 years of shared life. I paid the agreed-upon amount, Rachel dropped all challenges, and the Mitchell family home remained securely in the trust, its future intact. That evening, I walked through the empty house alone, really seeing it for the first time in months. Without the shadow of conflict, I could appreciate again what had made it special to my grandfather, not just the architectural details or historical significance, but the sense of continuity, of being part of something larger than a single lifetime. In the kitchen, I found an old cookbook of my grandmother's, handwritten notes in the margins detailing adjustments to recipes, preferences of family members. "Daniel likes extra cinnamon," was scrawled next to an apple pie recipe. Such a small thing, but it brought tears to my eyes. The accumulated details of a family's life, preserved not in legal documents, but in everyday artifacts. I called my sister Jenny that night. "Would you and the kids like to come for Sunday dinner this weekend?" I asked impulsively. I found Grandma's cookbook and thought I might try her pot roast recipe. "We'd love that," Jenny said, surprised, but pleased. "Are you sure you're up for company?" The house is too quiet, I admitted. I think Grandpa would want it filled with family again. That Sunday dinner became a tradition. Jenny and her children, Emma, 10, and Liam, 7, brought noise and life back into rooms that had grown too solemn. I taught the kids about the secret compartment in the study, showed them how to identify the different woods used in the original construction, passed on the knowledge my grandfather had shared with me. As spring arrived, I hired a landscape architect to restore the garden to its former glory. Rachel had never been interested in the outdoor spaces, preferring minimal maintenance to traditional plantings. I found myself enjoying the process of researching historically appropriate varieties, learning about the sustainable watering systems that would protect the century-old oak trees while nurturing new growth. Marcus Sullivan, the private investigator, who had become something of a friend through the ordeal, stopped by occasionally to share a beer and check on my progress. "Heard about Rachel and Blackwood," he mentioned during one such visit as we sat on the newly restored porch. "Their development company in Seattle is struggling. 2 projects stalled due to permit issues, investors getting nervous." "I don't wish them ill," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "I just wanted this chapter closed." "Sometimes justice happens without our help," Marcus observed, raising his bottle in a small toast. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected package. No return address, just my name and the house on Maple Street. Inside was a small wooden box I recognized immediately, a jewelry box my grandfather had made for my grandmother on their 25th anniversary. Rachel had admired it once, and I'd given it to her to use for her own keepsakes. Inside was a folded note in Rachel's handwriting. "This belongs with the house and its history. I'm sorry for trying to take what wasn't mine to take." Beneath the note lay my grandmother's wedding ring, which I'd thought lost years ago during a move. Rachel must have found it and kept it, perhaps initially intending to return it, perhaps later seeing it as another asset to claim. Its return now felt like the closing of a circle, the restoration of something small but significant to its rightful place. I placed the ring in the hidden compartment alongside my grandfather's letter and the trust documents. Together, they told a story of loss and preservation, of things nearly taken but ultimately secured. That fall, I was approached by the Portland Historical Society about including the house in their annual Historic Homes tour. I agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to share not just the architectural significance, but the human story of preservation. On the day of the tour, dozens of visitors moved respectfully through the rooms, admiring original features, asking questions about restoration techniques. I stood in the foyer, explaining the history of the stained glass transom window my grandfather had rescued from a demolished church in the 1970s when an older woman approached me. "You must be Daniel," she said, her eyes crinkling with a warm smile. "I knew your grandfather. Howard and I served on the neighborhood association together back when this area was fighting against developers who wanted to tear down these old houses for apartment buildings." "You knew Grandpa Howard?" I was instantly interested. I'd love to hear about that. Her name was Eleanor Winters, and she had stories about my grandfather I'd never heard. His passionate advocacy for historic preservation, the community meetings he'd hosted in this very house, the coalition he'd built that ultimately led to the neighborhood's historic designation. This house was more than just his home, Eleanor told me as we sat in the kitchen after the tour ended. It was a symbol of what he believed in, that some things are worth saving, worth fighting for, not just for their beauty or history, but for what they represent about our values as a community. Her words resonated deeply, adding another dimension to my understanding of why my grandfather had established the trust, why he'd been so adamant about the house remaining in the family. "Would you like to see some photographs?" Eleanor asked. "I was the unofficial photographer for the Preservation Committee. I have albums from those days." The following weekend, Eleanor returned with 3 photo albums documenting the neighborhood's transformation from endangered to preserved. There was my grandfather on the porch of our house, surrounded by neighbors with handmade signs. There he was again at City Hall, speaking at a podium. And most surprisingly, there was a much younger version of myself, maybe 7 or 8 years old, helping plant trees along the parkway that now provided mature shade for the entire block. "You were his little shadow," Eleanor remembered fondly. "He used to say the work wasn't just for the present, but for when you grew up, so you'd have something authentic to inherit." That evening, after Eleanor left, I sat on the porch swing and watched the neighborhood settling into evening routines. Lights coming on in windows, people returning from work, the continuity of daily life playing out against the backdrop of houses that had witnessed a century of such moments. I thought about Rachel and the vastly different values that had ultimately driven us apart. She had seen the house as an asset, a means to financial gain. I saw it as my grandfather had, a living piece of history, a commitment to something beyond market fluctuations and development potential. The irony wasn't lost on me that her attempt to take the house had ultimately deepened my connection to it and its significance. Without the threat of losing it, I might never have met Eleanor, might never have fully understood my grandfather's larger vision for preservation. Sometimes we don't truly appreciate what we have until someone tries to take it away. As autumn progressed into winter, I continued the restoration projects, now with a clearer sense of purpose. Each repaired banister spindle, each carefully matched paint color, each restored window frame was an act of continuity, connecting past to future. Jenny's children became eager apprentices, especially Emma, who showed a natural talent for detailed work. "Can I help with the stained glass?" she asked one weekend, watching me carefully clean the sections of the dining room windows. "It takes practice," I cautioned, but set up a small workstation where she could learn the basics safely. "Is this what great-grandpa Howard taught you?" she asked, carefully applying copper foil to the edge of a glass piece. "Yes, though I was older than you. He said some skills skip a generation. His father taught him and he taught me." Emma nodded solemnly. "And you're teaching me, so it didn't skip." Her simple observation struck me powerfully. The chain remained unbroken, despite Rachel's attempt to sever it completely. The knowledge, the values, the commitment to preservation, all continuing through new hands. That night, I added a codicil to my will, naming Emma as the future trustee of the Mitchell Family Preservation Trust when she reached adulthood. The house would eventually pass to her, along with the responsibility and the stories it contained. Not because she was the oldest, not because of any legal requirement, but because she had shown the natural affinity for its care that my grandfather had recognized in me. The following spring, a familiar blue SUV parked across from the house one afternoon. I was in the front garden, planting heritage roses from cuttings I'd sourced from a specialist nursery. It took me a moment to recognize Jason Blackwood as he approached, looking less polished than during our bar meeting, his designer clothes replaced by casual wear, his confident stride now hesitant. "Mitchell," he nodded in greeting, stopping at the garden gate. "Blackwood," I returned evenly. "What brings you here?" He gestured vaguely toward the house. "Driving through the neighborhood. Thought I'd see what might have been." I wiped, my hands on my jeans, and stood. "The development project that got away." He smiled ruefully. "Something like that." He paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. "Things didn't work out with Rachel or with the Seattle projects." "I heard." She talked about this place constantly. Even after everything fell apart, she'd mentioned details about it, some window seat where she used to read, the way light hit the staircase in the morning. He shook his head. "I never understood her obsession with it." especially after we lost. It wasn't hers to lose, I said quietly. That was the point she never grasped. Blackwood nodded slowly. I get it now, seeing it like this. It's not just real estate, is it? It's something else entirely. It's a trust, I said, meaning far more than the legal document. A responsibility. He extended his hand, surprising me. No hard feelings? Business is business. I considered his offer. The casual dismissal of what had been a life-altering betrayal packaged as mere commerce. This was never business to me, I said finally, but I wish you well. He withdrew his hand, accepting the rebuff with a slight nod. Fair enough. Good luck with your preservation. I watched him drive away, feeling a strange sense of closure. Rachel and Blackwood had represented a worldview that saw everything as fungible, everything for sale at the right price. Standing in the garden my grandfather had originally planted, that I was now restoring with my niece's help, I knew with absolute certainty that some things existed beyond price tags and property, values. That evening I sat in the study and wrote a letter of my own, to be placed alongside my grandfather's in the hidden compartment. A letter for Emma, for the day when she would become the guardian of this legacy. I wrote about value and worth, about the difference between price and meaning, about the battle that had nearly cost us this continuous thread of family history. The trust document kept the house in our family, I wrote in conclusion, but the real trust is something less tangible. It's the belief that some things deserve to be protected, not for what they're worth, but for what they mean. That's the true inheritance, and now it passes to you. A year after the divorce was finalized, the house on Maple Street had transformed. Not structurally, I'd been careful to maintain its historical integrity, but in spirit. What had once felt like a museum to my grandfather's memory now pulsed with renewed life. Sunday dinners with Jenny and her children had expanded to include Eleanor Winters and her husband, George, who shared more stories of the neighborhood's history. My colleague Michael from Nexus Pharmaceuticals often joined us with his wife and their toddler son. The dining room that had hosted so many silent meals during my marriage to Rachel now echoed with conversation and laughter. I'd taken a step back from international travel, delegating the Asia-Pacific trips to younger team members eager to prove themselves. My boss had been surprised but supportive. You've built the division, Daniel. Maybe it's time to enjoy the fruits of that labor. It meant a modest reduction in bonus potential, but the trade-off, being present, being rooted, felt right in ways I couldn't have articulated a year earlier. On a crisp October morning, I was carefully removing decades of paint from the front porch columns when a delivery truck pulled up. The driver approached with a certified letter requiring signature. Inside was formal notification from the Portland City Council. The Mitchell House was being considered for landmark designation due to its historical and architectural significance. Eleanor's doing, I suspected, recalling her comments about my grandfather's preservation work. I called her immediately. Did you nominate the house for landmark status? Her laugh confirmed my suspicion. Guilty as charged. The Preservation Committee has been trying to get this block designated for years. Your restoration work tipped the scales, proving these old Victorians can be modernized without losing their character. What does landmark status mean exactly? I asked, scanning the dense legal language of the notification. Protection, primarily. Once designated, the exterior can't be significantly altered without review. It's an additional safeguard beyond your family trust. The house becomes part of the city's recognized heritage. I thanked her, genuinely moved by the gesture. My grandfather would have been proud to see his preservation work recognized officially. The designation process would take months, involving inspections, documentation, public hearings. I committed to seeing it through. That same week, I received another unexpected communication, an email from Rachel's sister, Olivia. We'd been close during the marriage, though contact had ceased abruptly during the divorce. Her message was brief but direct. "I'm in town next week. Could we meet? There are things you should know." We arranged to meet at Powell's Books Cafe, neutral territory with enough ambient noise for privacy. Olivia arrived, looking much as I remembered, Rachel's features softened by a gentler personality, her expression hesitant as she approached my table. "Thank you for seeing me," she began, settling across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "We were family once," I said simply. "That didn't all disappear." She nodded, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "I owe you an apology, Daniel. I knew what Rachel was planning and said nothing. The admission hung between us, heavier than I'd expected." "You knew about the house transfer?" "Not the specifics, but I knew she was planning to end the marriage once she'd secured assets. She talked about it when she visited us in Chicago last year." Olivia looked down, avoiding my eyes. "I told her it was wrong. We argued about it. That's why we haven't spoken since." "Why tell me this now?" I asked, trying to keep accusation from my voice. "Because she's doing it again." Olivia finally met my gaze. "She's engaged to a surgeon in Seattle, Rodney Chambers. Older man, widowed, grown children, owns a vacation property on Orcas Island that's been in his family for generations." Understanding dawned slowly. "And she's showing keen interest in its history and potential." Olivia nodded. I saw the pattern immediately. The same questions about ownership structure, the same suggestions about updating the property. "Have you warned him?" "Tried to. He thinks I'm just the jealous sister, projecting my own failed marriage onto Rachel's fresh start." She sighed heavily. "So I came to you instead. I thought, maybe you could do something." "What exactly do you expect me to do, Olivia? Call a stranger and warn him his fiancée is a con artist?" The bitterness in my voice surprised even Meteen. "Why would he believe me any more than you?" "Because you have proof. The court records, the forensic evidence of forgery." She reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. "I know it's asking a lot, but if the situations were reversed, wouldn't you want someone to warn you?" I sat back, considering. The rational part of me understood Olivia's reasoning, but another part, perhaps the part still healing, resisted the idea of re-entangling myself in Rachel's life, even peripherally. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "That's all I can promise." Olivia accepted this with a grateful nod. Before leaving, she handed me a business card. "Rodney Chambers, cardiothoracic surgeon at Northwest Memorial." She hesitated. "For what it's worth, Daniel, I always thought you were too good for her, the way you've handled everything. It proves I was right." That evening, I sat in the study with Dr. Chambers' business card on the desk before me. The ethical calculus wasn't simple. I had no love left for Rachel, but did that obligate me to insert myself into her current relationship? Was it justice or vindictiveness that would motivate such an intervention? I put the card in my desk drawer, unresolved. The next morning, I called Alex for his perspective. "Legally, you're under no obligation," he said after I explained the situation. "The non-disclosure agreement specifically exempts communications with potential spouses about the divorce, primarily to prevent either party from misrepresenting what happened. So I could contact him without violating the agreement." "Yes, but that doesn't answer whether you should." Alex paused. "This isn't a legal question, Dan. It's a moral one. He was right, of course. And morally, could I justify remaining silent if Rachel was plotting the same scheme that had nearly cost me my family home? I thought of Dr. Chambers' property on Orcas Island, likely a place filled with its own history and memories, its own generational significance. After 3 days of deliberation, I composed a carefully worded email to Dr. Chambers, requesting a brief meeting during his upcoming conference in Portland, information Olivia had provided. I mentioned only that I had information relevant to his engagement that he might want to consider before proceeding. Professional, factual, without accusation or emotion. His response came the same day, curt but affirmative. We would meet at his hotel the following Tuesday. The Heathman Hotel was one of Portland's landmarks, its wood-paneled lobby speaking to an earlier era of elegance. I arrived early, settling into one of the leather chairs with a clear view of the entrance. Dr. Chambers proved punctual, arriving precisely at our agreed time. He was tall and distinguished, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions daily. "Mr. Mitchell." He extended his hand, his grip firm and brief. "You have information about Rachel? Perhaps we could sit." I gestured to a quieter corner of the lobby. Once settled, I began carefully. I was married to Rachel for 9 years. Our divorce was finalized 14 months ago. "She's mentioned the marriage," he said evenly, described it as amicable but ultimately incompatible. I couldn't help the short laugh that escaped. "That's one interpretation. I assume you have another. I have court records, forensic evidence, and witness testimony." I placed a slim folder on the table between us. "Rachel attempted to transfer my family home solely into her name while I was overseas, using a forged power of attorney. When that failed due to a family trust protecting the property, she tried other means." Dr. Chambers' expression remained impassive as he opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Copies of the falsified power of attorney, the forensic handwriting analysis proving forgery, the transcript from Patricia Dawson's testimony about the fraudulent notarization. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked after several minutes of silence. "Your fiancée systematically planned to take property that had been in my family for generations. My sister-in-law believes she may be implementing a similar plan regarding your property on Orcas Island." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Olivia contacted you?" "Yes, she recognized patterns in Rachel's behavior." Dr. Chambers closed the folder carefully. "My property on Orcas is protected by a family trust established by my father. It cannot be transferred out of the family bloodline, under any circumstances. The similarity to my own situation was striking. That was true of my house as well. It didn't prevent Rachel from trying, or from causing significant legal and personal distress in the process." He studied me with the assessing gaze of a physician. "What do you want from this, Mr. Mitchell? Revenge? Satisfaction?" "Nothing," I said honestly. "I've moved on with my life. But if someone had warned me about Rachel's methods before I discovered them myself, it would have saved considerable pain and expense. I'm simply offering you that warning. And if I choose to disregard it, that's entirely your prerogative. The information is yours now, to use or ignore as you see fit." Dr. Chambers nodded slowly, then tucked the folder into his briefcase. "I appreciate your candor. Whether I believe these allegations or consider them the bitter recriminations of an ex-husband remains to be seen." "That's fair," I acknowledged. "I've fulfilled my obligation to truth as I see it. The rest is up to you." We parted without further discussion, each returning to our separate lives. I felt neither vindication nor regret, only the quiet certainty of having done what I believed right, regardless of outcome. The landmark designation process for the house proceeded smoothly. Historical architects documented the original features, noting the quality of preservation and restoration. The preliminary approval came through just before Thanksgiving, with the final decision scheduled for a public hearing in January. Life settled into new rhythms. Emma's interest in historical preservation grew, her school projects increasingly focused on architectural history and conservation techniques. Jenny joked that we'd created a mini-preservationist monster, but her pride was evident. I enrolled Emma in a youth program at the Historical Society, where she could learn from professionals in the field. December brought unexpected news from two sources. First, Eleanor called with information about a set of original blueprints for the house, discovered in the archives of an architectural firm that had gone defunct in the 1940s. "They're offering them to you as the current owner," she explained excitedly. "Apparently your grandfather tried to track them down years ago, without success. And the blueprints revealed details I'd never known: a planned conservatory that had never been built, servant passages that had been sealed during earlier renovations, the original color scheme for the exterior. I spent hours studying them, planning future restoration work that would bring the house even closer to its original vision. The second piece of news came via a brief, formal email from Dr. Rodney Chambers. "Thank you for the information provided during our meeting. After due consideration and investigation, I have ended my engagement to Rachel Donovan. While this outcome was painful, it was preferable to the alternative. You have my gratitude." I read the message twice, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also a lingering sadness for what might have been in another life with a different Rachel. I forwarded the email to Olivia with a simple note. "Thought you should. No. Hope this brings some peace." Her response came quickly. "Thank you. It does." The winter passed quietly, marked by holiday gatherings in the house that felt more genuine than any during my marriage. Jenny hosted Christmas dinner in the formal dining room, the table extended to its full length to accommodate our growing circle of friends. Emma proudly showed off the stained glass ornaments she'd made under my tutelage, each guest receiving one as a gift. January brought the public hearing for the landmark designation. I testified about the house's history, its role in the neighborhood, preservation movement, the continuous occupancy by my family since 1926. The vote was unanimous. The Mitchell House on Maple Street was officially designated a Portland Historic Landmark. As I left City Hall, certificate in hand, I spotted a familiar figure on the steps, Jason Blackwood, looking somewhat diminished from our last encounter, his designer clothes replaced by something more subdued. "Congratulations," he offered, gesturing to the certificate. "Official recognition." "What are you doing here, Blackwood?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than hostile. "Attending a zoning hearing. Different project, different approach." He hesitated. "Restoration rather than development this time. Turns out there's a market for authentically preserved historic properties." The irony wasn't lost on me. Quite a change in direction. He shrugged. "Market adaptation. After Seattle, I needed a new angle. Preservation tax credits, heritage tourism. There's profit in history if you work with it rather than against it." I studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "And Rachel? Is she part of this new venture?" "Rachel is in California now. Our professional relationship ended after Orcas Island." He met my gaze directly. "You warned Chambers, didn't you?" I neither confirmed nor denied it. "People make their own choices." Blackwood nodded slowly. "Fair enough. For what it's worth, I've come to respect what you stood for. The house, the history, it matters more than I understood." "Glad to hear it," I said, meaning it. Perhaps something positive had emerged from the conflict after all, a developer recognizing the value of preservation over demolition. As winter gave way to spring, I made a significant professional decision, accepting a position as Vice President of Regional Development at Nexus Pharmaceuticals. The role meant permanently reducing travel to quarterly oversight trips, with day-to-day operations managed by my team in each country. It meant being present, being home. The first overseas trip under this new arrangement took me back to Tokyo, The city where I'd received that fateful bank notification 18 months earlier. Standing in Narita International Airport, I experienced a moment of disorientation, as if I might suddenly revert to that earlier version of myself, unaware of what awaited at home. But I was different now, fundamentally changed by what I'd endured and overcome. The trust that had protected the house had proven both literal and metaphorical, my grandfather's foresight extending beyond legal precautions to include the cultivation of values that would guide me when tested. Upon my return to Portland, I found Emma waiting eagerly with news. Her preservation project on the Mitchell House had won first place in the regional history fair, earning her an invitation to the state competition. They asked lots of questions about the trust, she told me as we walked through the garden I'd restored using my grandmother's planting diagrams, about how it protected the house when someone tried to take it. "And what did you tell them?" I asked, curious about her perspective on events she'd only heard secondhand. "That trusts aren't just legal papers," she said thoughtfully. "They're promises across time, like Great-Grandpa Howard promising to keep the house safe for you, and you promising to keep it safe for the future." Her understanding, so clear and untainted by cynicism, moved me deeply. "That's exactly right, Em, exactly right." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I took out my grandfather's letter again, reading it with the deeper appreciation that comes from lived experience. The house is just wood and stone. The home is what you carry inside you. He'd been right, of course. The house itself was merely the physical manifestation of something more significant. The values of integrity, continuity, and responsible stewardship that he'd instilled through example. I'd fought for the house, yes, but in doing so, I'd really been fighting for those underlying principles. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor, Thomas Wu, the family banker who had first alerted me to the power of attorney form with my supposedly matching signature. "I hope you don't mind the unscheduled visit," he said, as I welcomed him into the foyer. "I was in the neighborhood and wanted to deliver this personally." This was a small brass key, tarnished with age. I accepted it, puzzled. "Your grandfather maintained a safe deposit box at our main branch," Thomas explained. "Access was restricted until specific conditions were met, either his instruction or the Mitchell House receiving historic landmark designation." "The designation just came through in January," I confirmed. Thomas nodded. "Our records were updated accordingly. The box has remained untouched since your grandfather's death. He was quite specific about the circumstances under which it should be opened." That afternoon, I visited the bank's downtown branch. The safe deposit vault was in the original part of the building, its brass fixtures and marble floors speaking to an era when banks were built to convey permanence and security. The box Thomas retrieved was smaller than I'd expected. He left me in a private viewing room to examine its contents. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting, and beneath it, a smaller box of polished wood. I opened the envelope first. The letter inside was dated 3 months before my grandfather's death. "Daniel," it began, "if you're reading this, the house has received the landmark designation I long sought for it. Congratulations. This recognition means our family's stewardship has been acknowledged beyond our private commitment." I paused, surprised that he had anticipated this outcome years before it happened. The enclosed box contained something I've kept safe for many years. The original deed to the property, signed in 1926 when your great-grandfather purchased it. Along with it are photographs documenting each generation's contributions to its preservation and improvement. I opened the wooden box gently. Inside, protected in archival tissue, was the deed. The elaborate handwritten script of another era declaring the property transferred to Edward Mitchell and his heirs, Beneath it were photographs I'd never seen before. My great-grandfather standing proudly on the newly constructed porch. My grandfather as a young man, repairing damage after a storm. My father helping install the stained glass windows in the dining room. These documents, my grandfather's letter continued, are the tangible evidence of our family's commitment to preservation. But the true legacy is intangible, the understanding that we are temporary guardians of things that should outlast us. This philosophy guided me in business, in friendship, and in family matters. The final paragraph caught me by surprise. I've always believed you would face challenges to this legacy, Daniel. Your father did. I did. Each generation must defend what matters against those who cannot see beyond immediate gain. That you're reading this letter means you've succeeded in that defense, perhaps without even knowing you were continuing a family tradition of standing firm when it matters most. Had he somehow anticipated Rachel's attempt? Not specifically, perhaps, but he had understood the perennial tension between preservation and exploitation, between respect for legacy and the temptation of profit. That understanding had led him to establish the trust, to leave me his letter, to arrange this final message from beyond. I carefully returned the documents to their box, this new piece of family history joining the continuum I was now consciously extending. On the drive home, I thought about legacy, not just what we inherit, but what we choose to carry forward and ultimately pass on. The house on Maple Street stood as it had for nearly a century, its windows catching the afternoon light, its presence on the street, both individual and part of a greater whole. I parked in the driveway and took a moment to simply look at it, seeing beyond the architectural features to the stories embedded in its walls, my great-grandfather's pride, my grandfather's dedication, my own battle to protect it, and now Emma's budding commitment to its future. Rachel had seen only a valuable property. I saw the physical embodiment of a promise kept through generations, the promise that some things deserve protection not for their market value but for their meaning. Inside, I added my grandfather's safe deposit box contents to the hidden compartment, in the study, alongside the trust documents and my letter to Emma. Together, they formed a continuous narrative of protection and preservation, of values maintained against challenges both expected and unforeseen. That evening, I called Eleanor with a proposal, using the house as the headquarters for a new neighborhood preservation initiative, providing space for workshops on restoration techniques, historical research resources, and community planning meetings. The very purpose my grandfather had once used it for, now renewed for a new generation. Howard would be thrilled, she said, her voice warm with approval, bringing it full circle. Full circle indeed. The house that Rachel had tried to take from my family was now not only protected by the trust and landmark designation, but returning to its role as a center for community preservation efforts. What had been intended as an endpoint, the conversion to luxury condos, had instead become a continuation and expansion of my grandfather's vision. I remembered Dr. Chambers' question during our meeting at the Heathman, "What do you want from this?" At the time, I'd said nothing, believing I sought only to prevent another person from experiencing what I had endured. But with the perspective of time, I recognized a deeper truth. What I'd wanted, what I'd fought for, was the opportunity to honor commitments across generations, to be the kind of person who recognizes that some bonds transcend immediate self-interest. In standing firm against Rachel's deception, I discovered my own place in the continuum of preservation my grandfather had valued so deeply. The trust document she never knew I filed had protected the house in its moment of greatest vulnerability. But the true trust, the faith placed in each generation to safeguard what matters, continued to unfold in ways both tangible and intangible, extending beyond legal protections to encompass the values that gave those protections meaning. As twilight settled over Maple Street, I walked through rooms that had witnessed a century of family history, each space holding memories of what had been and possibilities for what might yet be. The house remained, as it had always been, both shelter and symbol, a place to live and a reminder of how to live. Rachel had seen only its market value. I saw its true worth, and in that difference lay everything that had driven us apart and, paradoxically, everything that had helped me find my way forward, not just as the owner of a historic home, but as the custodian of a legacy meant to endure. 2 years had passed since the day I discovered Rachel's attempt to transfer our house solely into her name. The seasons had cycled through the maple trees lining our street, their leaves turning from vibrant green to fiery orange and back again. The neighborhood had changed too. 3 houses renovated in the historical style, a new family moving in across the street. The community garden at the end of the block expanded under Eleanor's tireless supervision. Life had found its new rhythm. My position at Nexus Pharmaceuticals had evolved to focus on strategic partnerships rather than constant travel. Emma was now 12, spending every other weekend at the house, learning restoration techniques and poring over architectural books. Jenny had started dating a history professor who shared our family's passion for preservation. The house on Maple Street hosted monthly meetings for the Neighborhood Historical Society, its rooms filled with people committed to protecting Portland's architectural heritage. I thought of Rachel less frequently now. The anger had faded, replaced by a kind of detached understanding. Her actions, while inexcusable, had ultimately strengthened my connection to my family legacy rather than severing it. In an unexpected way, I owed her that clarity of purpose. On a brisk April morning, Thomas Wu called with news that temporarily reopened old wounds. "I thought you should hear this from me rather than through the grapevine," he began, his normally formal tone softened with concern. "Rachel Donovan has returned to Portland." My grip tightened on the phone. "I see. May I ask how you know?" "She's applied for a small business loan through our bank, an interior design consultancy specializing in historic properties." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Given the history, I wanted to give you advance notice." I thanked him for the courtesy, assuring him that Rachel's return held no power over me now. After hanging up, I sat in the kitchen, watching morning light filter through the stained glass panels Emma and I had restored the previous summer. The news should have been inconsequential. Portland was a large enough city that our paths need never cross. Yet a residual unease lingered. That evening, Jenny arrived for our weekly dinner with an unusual expression, part concern, part curiosity. "Have you heard?" she asked as she helped chop vegetables for the stir-fry. "About Rachel being back?" "Yes, Thomas called this morning." "And how do you feel about it?" Her gaze was assessing, protective. I considered the question honestly. Surprised, mostly. Seattle seemed ideal for her. Larger market, wealthier clients. Coming back to Portland, where people know what she did, seems counterproductive. "Unless she's reinvented herself," Jenny suggested, "or unless she has unfinished business." The phrase sent an involuntary chill through me. The house is more protected now than ever. The trust, the landmark designation, the historical registry. There's nothing she could do, even if she wanted to. Jenny nodded, apparently satisfied. "Just be careful, okay?" She was very good at presenting one face while planning something entirely different. The conversation shifted to other topics. Emma's upcoming history competition, the vintage doorknobs I'd found at an architectural salvage yard, Jenny's tentative plans to introduce her professor to the family. We didn't mention Rachel again, but her presence in Portland lingered like a faint disturbance in otherwise calm waters. 2 weeks later, the disturbance took tangible form. I was leaving a meeting downtown when I saw her across the street, emerging from a cafe with a portfolio case under her arm. The same blonde ponytail, the same confident stride. She hadn't seen me. I could have slipped away unnoticed, avoiding an unnecessary encounter. Instead, I crossed the street. Some conversations. I better had deliberately than by chance. Rachel. She stopped, turning with the composed grace that had once seemed so natural, but now appeared carefully rehearsed. Recognition flashed across her features, followed by something less readable. Wariness, perhaps, or calculation. Daniel, she acknowledged. I thought I might run into you eventually. Thomas mentioned you're back in Portland, starting a new business. She nodded, adjusting her grip on the portfolio. Historic interior design consulting. There's a growing market for period-appropriate renovations. The conversation felt surreal, mundane pleasantries with the woman who had methodically planned to take my family home. Quite a shift from your previous approach to historic properties, I observed, keeping my tone neutral. People change, she said simply. Lessons are learned, sometimes the hard way. I studied her, searching for signs of the Rachel I'd known, or thought I'd known, during our marriage. Why Portland? You left behind a certain reputation here. Because starting over completely didn't work. Her frankness surprised me. In Seattle, I was always playing a role, pretending to be someone without a past. It wasn't sustainable. A gleaming BMW pulled up to the curb beside us, and Jason Blackwood emerged from the driver's side. The shock must have shown on my face, because Rachel quickly clarified. Professional collaboration only, she said. Jason's development company is restoring the Whitman building on Jefferson Street. I'm consulting on period authentic interiors. Blackwood approached, extending his hand with considerably more confidence than during our last encounter. Mitchell, good to see you. I hope there are no hard feelings about the past. I accepted the handshake briefly. That depends on whether the past stays in the past. Completely, he assured me. Rachel and I are strictly business partners. Now, her expertise in historic preservation complements my restoration projects. The irony was almost too perfect. The two people who had conspired to convert my family home into luxury condos, now presenting themselves as champions of historic preservation. Yet their portfolio case contained blueprints for the Whitman building, a 1910 commercial structure that preservation advocates had been fighting to save for years. You're actually restoring the Whitman? I asked, skeptical. Last I heard, Westlake Development was planning to gut it for modern office space. They were, Blackwood confirmed, until my company made a counteroffer emphasizing the tourism and tax credit potential of an authentic restoration. The Preservation Committee endorsed our proposal last month. Rachel unzipped the portfolio, revealing detailed plans that did indeed show meticulous restoration rather than demolition. The original bank hall will become a public atrium, she explained, professional enthusiasm momentarily overriding the awkwardness of our reunion. We're sourcing period-appropriate materials for everything from the tile work to the light fixtures. I found myself genuinely impressed, despite my reservations. That's actually commendable. The Whitman is an architectural treasure. We've learned that working with history is more rewarding than working against it, Rachel said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. Some lessons come at high personal cost. The moment stretched between us, not reconciliation exactly, but a quiet acknowledgement of how completely our lives had diverged and transformed since the divorce. Whatever Rachel's motives for returning to Portland, whatever her current relationship with Blackwood, they seem to be genuinely engaged in preservation work now. I should let you get to your meeting, I said finally. Good luck with the Whitman project. As I walked away, Rachel called after me. Daniel, I turned. The house, your grandfather's house, how is it? The question seemed sincere, free, of the calculation I'd come to associate with her. Thriving, I answered honestly. It's become something of a center for neighborhood preservation efforts. She nodded, something like regret crossing her features. I'm glad. That's what it should be. I continued downtown to my next appointment, my thoughts churning with this unexpected development. People could change. I certainly had in the aftermath of Rachel's betrayal. Was it possible she'd experienced a similar transformation, finding genuine value in preservation rather than exploitation? That evening, I called Eleanor to ask about the Whitman Building project. Her enthusiasm confirmed what Rachel and Blackwood had told me. "It's a remarkable turnaround," she said. "Blackwood Development submitted the most historically sensitive proposal we've seen in years. The committee was skeptical at first, given his reputation, but the plans were impeccable, right down to recreating the original crown moldings using traditional techniques. And Rachel is involved as the interior consultant. Yes, she approached the committee directly, acknowledging her past mistakes and asking for an opportunity to demonstrate her commitment to preservation. Most of us were wary, but her portfolio was impressive. Several Seattle projects where she'd specialized in historically accurate restorations. I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with my understanding of Rachel's character. "Do you think people can change that fundamentally?" Eleanor's laugh was warm through the phone line. "Howard and I were developers ourselves in the early days, interested primarily in profit margins until we realized what was being lost. Your grandfather was instrumental in our conversion to the preservation cause." She paused. "Sometimes the most passionate preservationists are those who once threatened the very things they now protect." The observation stayed with me in the weeks that followed. I saw Rachel occasionally at preservation committee events or city planning meetings, always in a professional context, always focused on whatever historical project Blackwood Development had undertaken. Each encounter was civil, increasingly less awkward as months passed. Summer arrived, bringing with it the completion of my own restoration project, the rear garden, which I'd reconstructed based on my grandmother's detailed planting journals. From the 1940s, Eleanor suggested hosting the annual Preservation Society fundraiser in the garden, an event that typically drew Portland's most committed historic conservation advocates. "Your grandfather hosted it here several times," she reminded me. "It would be a lovely continuation of tradition." I agreed, pleased by the opportunity to showcase the garden's restoration. The event was scheduled for mid-July, when the heritage roses would be in full bloom and the evening light would linger well into the gathering. The guest list gave me pause when Eleanor shared it. Nearly 100 preservation advocates, including Rachel and Jason Blackwood, whose Whitman Building restoration had garnered significant positive attention. "Is that going to be a problem?" Eleanor asked directly. "I can adjust the invitations if necessary." I considered the question honestly. No, I decided. Their work on the Whitman deserves recognition regardless of our history. The day of the fundraiser arrived, the garden looking its best under clear summer skies. Guests began arriving at 6, admiring the historically accurate plantings and the architectural details of the house's exterior. Emma served as an enthusiastic guide, proudly explaining restoration techniques to anyone who showed interest. Rachel arrived alone, dressed simply but elegantly. She greeted me with a poised nod, her gaze taking in the restored garden with genuine appreciation. "Your grandmother's design," she observed. "You've brought it back exactly as it was in the old photographs." "You remember the photographs?" I hadn't expected that level of recall. "Of course. They were in the album in your grandfather's study." She gestured toward a particularly vibrant rose bush near the stone pathway. "That's Queen Elizabeth, isn't it? Your grandmother's favorite." The accuracy of her memory was disarming. During our marriage, Rachel had shown little interest in the garden's history, or so I'd believed. Perhaps I'd underestimated her attention, or perhaps she'd simply kept her observations to herself. The fundraiser progressed smoothly. Eleanor's skilled orchestration ensuring that conversation flowed as generously as the wine. Near twilight, she called for the group's attention, thanking everyone for their support of Portland's preservation efforts before introducing the evening's recognition. Awards. The Whitman Building Restoration represents everything our society stands for, Eleanor announced, gesturing for Blackwood and Rachel to join her. A structure once slated for gutting has been reborn as a showcase of historical craftsmanship, while meeting modern usage needs. The Preservation Achievement Award goes to Blackwood Development and Donovan Interiors for their exemplary work. Applause rippled through the garden as Blackwood accepted the small bronze plaque. His brief speech was gracious, acknowledging the Preservation Committee's guidance and expressing genuine enthusiasm for continuing similar projects throughout Portland. When Rachel stepped forward to add her thanks, her gaze found mine in the crowd. "This award means a great deal to me," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Some of you know that my relationship with historical preservation hasn't always been positive. I once saw these buildings primarily as assets rather than legacies." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. It took losing something irreplaceable to understand what preservation really means, that we are stewards, not owners, of history. The gathering dispersed gradually as darkness fell, guests lingering to admire the garden illuminated by the subtle landscape lighting I'd installed. Following my grandfather's original plans, Rachel remained until most had departed, finally approaching me as I thanked Eleanor near the garden gate. "The house looks wonderful, Daniel," she said, when Eleanor had moved on to say her goodbyes to other guests. "Your grandfather would be proud of what you've done here." "Thank you." The compliment felt genuine, without hidden agenda. "The Whitman restoration is impressive too. You've found your niche." She nodded, glancing back at the Victorian silhouette against the night sky. "I wanted to tell you something, actually. The reason I came back to Portland." She hesitated. "It wasn't just about starting over professionally. It was about making amends in a way. Not directly to you, I knew that wasn't possible or welcome, but by contributing to the preservation community I once tried to undermine." The admission was unexpected in its candor. "The best apology is changed behavior," I observed. "Something like that," she agreed. "The irony isn't lost on me that I now spend my days meticulously researching original architectural details and advocating against modernizations that would compromise historical integrity. Life has a way of bringing us full circle sometimes." She smiled faintly at that. "Indeed." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing you should know. Blackwood Development is purchasing the old Meridian Hotel downtown. The previous owner was planning to demolish it for a parking structure. The Meridian was a 1920s gem that preservation advocates had been fighting to save for years. That's significant news. The Preservation Committee has been looking for a buyer with restoration intentions. The announcement goes out tomorrow. I thought you might appreciate knowing tonight, given that your grandfather was part of the original campaign to save it from demolition in the 1980s. I was genuinely surprised, both by the news itself and by Rachel's awareness of my grandfather's involvement with the Meridian. "How did you know about his connection to that building?" "I paid attention more than you realized," she said simply. "Not always with the right motives, perhaps, but I absorbed the history of this place and your family's role in preserving it." She gestured toward the house. "That knowledge serves a different purpose now." After she left, I remained in the garden, considering this new understanding of the woman I'd been married to for 9 years. Had the seeds of the preservationist she'd become always existed within the Rachel I'd known? Or had her transformation been born entirely from the consequences of her actions? The question had no simple answer. People were more complex than the binary judgments we often applied to them. Rachel had attempted to take my family home through deception and fraud. That remained true and undiminished, yet she had also apparently found her way to genuinely valuing the preservation principles she'd once sought to circumvent. The trust document she never knew I filed had protected the house during its moment of greatest vulnerability. But the true protection, I realized, had come from something less tangible, the values my grandfather had instilled, the understanding that some things deserved safeguarding, not for their monetary worth, but for their meaning across generations. As twilight deepened into night, I walked the pathways of the garden my grandmother had designed and my grandfather had maintained, that I had restored based on their careful documentation. The continuity was almost palpable, hands reaching across time to preserve what mattered, to pass along not just property, but purpose. Rachel's return to Portland and her apparent transformation didn't erase the past. The trust remained necessary, the legal protection still essential. But perhaps her journey from exploitation to preservation represented its own kind of restoration, not of our relationship, which remained appropriately severed, but of her understanding of value beyond price tags and property transfers. The garden stood as testimony to what patient restoration could accomplish, bringing back to life what had been neglected or damaged, not erasing the past, but building upon it thoughtfully. Perhaps people weren't so different from historic structures in that regard. Given the right circumstances, the right motivations, even those who had once threatened preservation might become its advocates. The next morning, I called Eleanor to thank her for orchestrating such a successful fundraiser. Our conversation eventually turned to Rachel's revelation about the Meridian Hotel. "It's true," Eleanor confirmed. "Blackwood Development signed the purchase agreement yesterday. The restoration plans are ambitious but historically sensitive." "Do you trust their commitment?" I asked, still cautious despite what I'd witnessed. Eleanor's response was measured. "I trust the legal protections we've put in place, the landmark designations, the preservation easements, the restoration requirements tied to the tax incentives they're receiving. But beyond that, yes, I believe they've genuinely embraced the preservation ethos. Sometimes the most dramatic conversions create the most dedicated advocates." Her words echoed my own reflections from the previous night. People could change, not easily or completely perhaps, but significantly enough to alter their impact on the world around them. I thought of my grandfather's letter, with its wisdom about houses being wood and stone, while homes were carried inside us. Perhaps something similar applied to values like preservation and integrity. They existed not just in legal documents or architectural details, but in the understanding we carried forward and passed on to others. Rachel had once seen the house on Maple Street as merely a valuable asset to be acquired and exploited. Now she worked to preserve buildings with similar historical significance. The change didn't erase her earlier actions, but it suggested that even those who once threatened what we valued might eventually come to share that valuation. The trust document she never knew I filed had done more than protect a physical structure. It had preserved a perspective, a commitment to stewardship that extended beyond ownership. That perspective had ultimately prevailed not just legally, but culturally, expanding to include even those who had once opposed it. As I ended my call with Eleanor and prepared for a day of meetings at Nexus Pharmaceuticals, I glanced at the photograph on my desk, my grandfather on the porch of the house, his expression conveying not just pride of ownership, but the deeper satisfaction of continuity and care. The house remained in the family, protected and preserved. But more importantly, the values it represented continued to expand their influence, sometimes in the most unexpected directions. The trust, both literal and metaphorical, remained unbroken. 5 years to the day after I'd discovered Rachel's and plot to take my family home, I stood in the garden watching early morning light illuminate the autumn colors. The maple trees that gave our street its name blazed with crimson and gold, their leaves carpeting the walkways I'd carefully restored, using my grandfather's original plans. The garden renovation had won a preservation award the previous year, Best Residential Historical Landscape Restoration, from the Portland Historical Society. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. "Don't forget, Emma's ceremony is at 2 p.m. We'll need to leave by 1:15. Today was a milestone for my niece. At 16, Emma would be formally inducted into the Junior Preservation Corps, a program for young people committed to heritage conservation. Her project, documenting the original craftsmanship techniques used in homes throughout our historic district, had earned her the highest recognition. I'd mentored her through the research, watching her passion for preservation grow from casual interest to genuine vocation. As I replied to Jenny, another notification appeared. An email from Morris Residential Law, the firm Rachel had used years ago when she attempted to transfer my house solely into her name. My heartbeat quickened reflexively, old anxieties briefly, resurfacing before rational thought took over. Rachel and I had no remaining legal connections. The divorce had been finalized years ago. The landmark designation had added another layer of protection to the house beyond the family trust. Still, seeing that law firm's name brought back memories of betrayal that had shaped the past 5 years of my life. I opened the email cautiously. Dear Mr. Mitchell, this letter serves as formal notification that Rachel Donovan, formerly Mitchell, passed away on October 12th following complications from surgery. As the executor of her estate, I am required to inform all relevant parties connected to her legal affairs. Ms. Donovan's will specifies that certain documents pertaining to your family property be returned to you, as they rightfully belong with the Mitchell family archives. These materials were collected during her historical research projects and include photographs and records relevant to your grandfather's preservation activism. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange transfer of these materials. Respectfully, Margaret Chen, Attorney at Law. I read the message twice, emotions colliding like weather fronts within me. Rachel was gone. The woman I'd shared 9 years of my life with, who had methodically planned to take my family home, whose later transformation into a preservation advocate had seemed both ironic and genuine, dead at 43. I hadn't spoken directly with Rachel in nearly 2 years, though we occasionally attended the same preservation events or city planning meetings. Our last interaction had been at the reopening ceremony for the renovated Meridian Hotel, where her work as historical consultant had been instrumental in restoring the landmark to its 1920s glory. We'd exchanged brief professional nods across the crowded lobby, the chasm of our shared past too wide for casual conversation, but no longer crackling with active animosity. I called the law office and arranged to collect the materials the following day. Whatever Rachel had deemed important enough to return in the event of her death, I wanted to see it sooner rather than later. That afternoon, watching Emma receive her Junior Preservationist medallion in the Grand Hall of Portland's historic City Hall, I found my thoughts repeatedly returning to mortality and legacy. My grandfather had preserved our family home not for himself, but for future generations. Rachel had ultimately found meaning in similar work, though only after first attempting to dismantle what my family had protected. "Uncle Daniel, did you see?" Emma rushed over after the ceremony, her medallion catching the light. "They mentioned Great-Grandpa Howard in the speech. They said his documentation techniques set the standard for preservation recording." "I saw," I assured her, genuinely proud of how our family's preservation ethos had passed to this next generation. "He would have been so proud to see you continuing his work." Later, as Jenny drove us back to Maple Street for the small celebration dinner we'd planned, Emma asked a question that caught me off guard. "Uncle Daniel, why did great-grandpa Howard care so much about old buildings? Mum says he spent more time documenting other people's houses than working on his own sometimes." It was a perceptive question, one that cut to the heart of something I'd come to understand only after nearly losing our family home. "I think he believed that some things have value beyond their usefulness to us personally," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "That we're responsible for protecting important things even if we don't own them or directly benefit from them. History isn't just facts in books. It's in the physical spaces where people lived and worked. Once those spaces are gone, something irreplaceable is lost." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "That's how I feel about the Westover carriage house. It's not ours, but it would be terrible if they tear it down for that parking lot." I smiled at the parallel. The Westover carriage house was Emma's current preservation crusade, a Victorian-era structure threatened by development. She'd organized petition drives and researched its historical significance with the determination that reminded me so much of my grandfather. The next morning, I arrived at Morris Residential Law as scheduled. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where Margaret Chen waited alongside several archival boxes and document cases. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Mitchell," she greeted me professionally. "These materials were specifically designated for return to you in Ms. Donovan's will. She was quite insistent they belong with your family archive." "Did she leave any explanation?" I asked, surveying the unexpected volume of materials. "Only this." Ms. Chen handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Rachel's distinctive handwriting. I opened it privately once I'd loaded everything into my car. Inside was a single-page letter dated 6 months earlier. "Daniel, if you're reading this, I've either finally found the courage to return these materials to you directly, or more likely, circumstances have made the decision for me. During our marriage, I discovered documents in your grandfather's study that detailed his extensive preservation work beyond your family home. Initially, I viewed them as I viewed everything then, in terms of potential value and exploitation. When I left Portland after our divorce, I took copies of some of these materials, telling myself I was entitled to something from those years. What began as spite evolved into genuine interest. The Meridian Hotel restoration started as a professional opportunity, but became something more meaningful when I realized your grandfather had meticulously documented its original features during the 1980s preservation battle. His drawings and photographs made authentic restoration possible when no other records existed. These boxes contain his original documentation of 12 historic Portland buildings, including 4 that have since been demolished. His work created a record of craftsmanship that would otherwise have been lost forever. They belong in your family archive, not mine. The final folder contains something I believe he intended for you, notes for a book about Portland's architectural heritage, that he never completed. His last entry was dated 2 weeks before his death. I won't ask for forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable, attempting to take something irreplaceable for purely selfish reasons. But I want you to know that through these documents, your grandfather ultimately taught me what you tried to explain during our marriage, that some things have value beyond price, beyond transaction. The trust document you filed protected your family home from me. Your grandfather's work protected something larger, a piece of our collective heritage. I've tried to continue that work in my own way. Rachel. At home, I spent hours going through the materials. The boxes contained meticulous documentation of historic buildings throughout Portland, detailed sketches, photographs, material samples, oral histories from craftsmen who had worked on the original construction. My grandfather's preservation work had been far more extensive than I'd ever realized. Most remarkable was the unfinished manuscript, Portland's Vanishing Craftsmanship, a record of building arts, 1880–1940. Nearly 300 pages of text, illustrations and photographs documenting techniques and details that had largely disappeared from modern construction. The final chapter remained partially outlined, with notes in my grandfather's handwriting about additional buildings he planned to document. That evening, I called Eleanor Winters, my grandfather's old preservation ally who had become a friend and mentor in my own restoration work. I had no idea Howard was writing a book, she said when I described the manuscript. Though it makes perfect sense, he was always saying someone needed to properly document these techniques before the last craftsmen who understood them were gone. It's remarkably comprehensive, I told her, and nearly ready for publication, even unfinished as it is. The Historical Society would certainly be interested, Eleanor suggested, or the University Press. Howard's name still carries significant weight in preservation circles. The conversation shifted to how Rachel had come to possess these materials, and her eventual decision to return them. I shared parts of her letter, still processing my own complicated feelings about this final communication from my ex-wife. People are capable of profound change, Eleanor observed gently. Not always, and rarely completely, but significantly. The Rachel who returned these materials was not the same person who tried to take your home. I know, I acknowledged, though it doesn't erase what happened. No, Eleanor agreed, but it does add another dimension to the story. Over the next several months, I worked with the Portland State University Press to prepare my grandfather's manuscript for publication. The editor was enthusiastic, recognizing its significance as both a historical record and a practical guide for contemporary restoration work. We decided to frame it as Howard Mitchell's work, with editorial contributions from me and a foreword explaining its journey to publication. Emma became my research assistant, helping to photograph existing examples of the craftsmanship techniques my grandfather had documented. Her involvement felt right, another generation engaging with this legacy of preservation. The book was scheduled for publication in the spring, coinciding with Portland's annual Historic Homes Tour. The University Press planned a special event at the Meridian Hotel, recognizing both my grandfather's documentation that had made its authentic restoration possible and Rachel's work implementing that vision. I hesitated when they suggested using photographs of the Meridian restoration alongside my grandfather's original documentation. It feels strange, I admitted to Jenny over dinner, acknowledging Rachel's work in a book celebrating Grandpa's preservation legacy. But it's truthful, Jenny pointed out. Her restoration work at the Meridian was faithful to his documentation. Whatever else happened between you, that part is genuine. She was right, of course. The complexity of human relationships rarely resolved into simple narrative arcs of heroes and villains. Rachel had attempted to take my family home through deception and fraud. She had also later committed herself to preservation work that honored the very values she had once dismissed. The trust document she never knew I filed had protected our family home at its moment of greatest vulnerability. But the true protection had come from something less tangible, the values my grandfather had instilled, the understanding that some things deserved safeguarding not for their monetary worth, but for their meaning across generations. That understanding had eventually reached even Rachel, transforming her from threat to unexpected ally in the larger cause of preservation. Not personally, our lives had remained appropriately separate after the divorce, but philosophically, in recognizing what my grandfather had always known, that preservation was about stewardship rather than ownership. The book launch at the Meridian Hotel drew preservation enthusiasts from across the Northwest. Standing at the podium in the meticulously restored grand ballroom, I found myself addressing not just my grandfather's legacy, but the complex journey that had brought his work to publication. Howard Mitchell believed that preservation is fundamentally an act of respect for craftsmanship, for history, for the continuity that connects generations, I began. He documented buildings he didn't own and had no financial stake in, motivated simply by the conviction that such knowledge deserved to be maintained. I gestured toward the exhibition of his drawings alongside photographs of the restored features they had informed. This hotel stands as testimony to what preservation can accomplish when we have proper documentation to guide us. My grandfather created that documentation when the Meridian faced demolition in the 1980s, not knowing if it would ever be useful. Decades later, those same drawings guided the restoration we see around us today. I acknowledged Rachel's work, without mentioning our personal history, focusing instead on the professional connection between my grandfather's documentation and her implementation of it. The personal context remained private, unnecessary to the public recognition of their shared commitment to authentic restoration. After the event, as guests circulated through the exhibition of my grandfather's drawings, Jason Blackwood approached me. His development company had partnered with Rachel on the Meridian restoration, a significant shift from their earlier plans to convert my family home into luxury condos. "She would have appreciated this," he said, nodding toward the display where Rachel's restoration work was credited alongside my grandfather's documentation. Seeing both contributions recognized, the book would be incomplete without acknowledging what was preserved as well as what was documented, I replied. "She changed, you know," Blackwood said after a moment. "Fundamentally, what started as a business pivot became genuine conviction." "I know," I acknowledged. "Her letter made that clear." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and moved on to speak with other guests. Our interaction remained brief and professional, without delving into the complicated past that connected us. Some bridges, once broken, are not meant to be fully rebuilt, but their fragments can still form part of a new foundation. That evening, returning to the house on Maple Street, the house Rachel had tried to take from my family, that had instead remained protected by the trust document she never knew I filed, I found myself thinking about legacy in its various forms. My grandfather's legacy lived in both the preserved house and his newly published work. My own legacy would include not just maintaining the house, but expanding understanding of why such preservation mattered. And Rachel? Her legacy was more complicated, a cautionary tale of attempted exploitation, transformed into eventual respect for the very values she had once dismissed. Her story had become part of our family narrative, not as the villain she might have remained, but as someone who had ultimately recognized what my grandfather had always known, that some things have value beyond price, beyond transaction, beyond single lifetimes. In the study, I added Rachel's final letter to the hidden compartment behind the bookshelf, alongside my grandfather's writings and the trust documents that had protected our home. Not because it held equal significance, but because it completed a circle, from threat to understanding, from exploitation to preservation. The trust, both document and principle, remained unbroken, strengthened now by the knowledge that its purpose had ultimately prevailed, not just legally, but philosophically, reaching even the person who had once most directly challenged it. Outside, autumn leaves drifted from the maples lining the street, continuing their centuries-old cycle of renewal. The neighborhood settled into evening quietude, historic homes standing shoulder to shoulder, their lights warm against the gathering darkness. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.